My 12-year-old son just taught my husband what it means to be a real man, and I've never been more proud or heartbroken at the same time. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah, and I'm 34 years old. I work part-time as a marketing coordinator. I've been married for 15 years, and I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life until last Sunday evening when everything I believed about my family got turned completely upside down. My husband Marcus is a construction foreman who comes home every day covered in dust and sweat. The kind of man who fixes everything that breaks in our house and never asks for help with anything. He's got these strong hands that can rebuild an engine or patch a roof. And when we first met, I was drawn to his confidence and his old-school way of looking at the world. Marcus grew up in a house where his father worked 16-hour days and his mother never questioned a single decision. Emotions were something you kept to yourself. Crying was reserved for funerals, and being a man meant providing for your family and keeping your feelings locked away. For years, I thought our differences complemented each other perfectly. He was steady and practical. I was intuitive and emotional. He handled the big decisions. I managed the day-to-day chaos of raising kids. It felt balanced, like we were covering all the bases together. Our son Tyler just turned 12 last month, and he's nothing like his father. While Marcus can spend hours tinkering with tools in the garage, Tyler would rather curl up in his bedroom reading Harry Potter for the 5th time or writing stories about dragons and wizards. He's got this incredible ability to pick up on everyone's emotions before they even realize they're feeling something. When I had a bad day at work last week, Tyler noticed immediately and made me a cup of tea without being asked. He cries during Disney movies, asks me thoughtful questions about why people act the way they do, and genuinely cares about other people's feelings in a way that honestly amazes me sometimes. Marcus has always struggled with Tyler's sensitivity. When Tyler was younger, Marcus would try to redirect him towards sports or more boyish activities, but Tyler just wasn't interested. Lately, those gentle redirections have become criticisms, and those criticisms have become something that feels a lot more like disappointment. Our daughter Emma is 8 years old and has her father completely wrapped around her finger. She's this whirlwind of energy and creativity who turns every room in our house into an art studio. Emma paints, draws, builds elaborate fairy houses out of cardboard boxes, and has this laugh that can brighten even Marcus's worst days. What I've started noticing, though, is how differently Marcus responds to Emma's emotions compared to Tyler's. When Emma gets upset about something, she's his little angel who needs comfort and protection. When Tyler gets upset about the exact same things, Marcus gets frustrated and tells him he needs to toughen up. Marcus's brother Jake has been spending more and more time at our house over the past few months. Jake is 38, works in sales, and has never been married or had kids. But somehow, that doesn't stop him from having very strong opinions about how families should operate. He's the type of guy who complains about participation trophies and thinks kids today are too soft. Every time Jake comes over for dinner, I feel like I'm being evaluated and judged for every single parenting choice I make. What's been happening in our house lately is that Marcus and Jake have formed this alliance where they discuss my parenting style like I'm not even sitting at the same table. They'll make comments about me being too involved in the kids' emotional lives or suggest that I'm creating drama when I try to help Tyler process his feelings. It started as occasional remarks, but it's escalated to the point where I've begun questioning every maternal instinct I have. 3 weeks ago, Marcus told me flat out that Tyler was becoming weak because of how I handle his emotions. 2 weeks ago, Jake actually laughed and said Tyler would never survive in the real world with a mother like me coddling him. Last week, Marcus nodded along when Jake said, and I quote, "A real man would fix her attitude real quick." I've been shrinking in my own home, trying to be less emotional, less reactive, less myself, hoping that would restore some peace to our family. But the more I tried to change who I was, the bolder they became in their criticism of me and Tyler. Last Sunday, I was exhausted from defending myself and desperately needed someone else to witness what our family dinners had become. So I invited Marcus's parents over, and I had no idea that my quiet, supposedly too sensitive son was about to show all of us what real strength actually looks like. I used to think I was living the American dream. We have a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood where kids still ride their bikes until the streetlights come on. I work part-time doing marketing for a local real estate company, which gives me flexibility to be there when Tyler and Emma get home from school. Marcus makes good money in construction, enough that we can take family vacations and I don't have to stress about groceries or school supplies. For years, our life felt stable and predictable in the best possible way. Marcus would come home from work, shower off the construction dust, and we'd all sit down for dinner together. He'd tell us about his day managing crews and building projects. Tyler would share stories from school. Emma would show us whatever masterpiece she'd created in art class, and I'd feel grateful for this life we'd built together. But somewhere along the way, that comfortable routine started feeling more like walking through a minefield. It began so gradually that I didn't even notice at first. Marcus would come home tired and stressed, and instead of Tyler's stories from school being a highlight of our dinner conversation, they started to irritate him. When Tyler would get excited about a book he was reading or a creative writing assignment he was working on, Marcus would cut him off with comments like, "That's nice. What did you do in PE today?" Or, "Did you at least try to play with the other boys at recess?" I started noticing how Tyler would deflate when his dad changed the subject away from the things that excited him most. My sensitive, thoughtful son began sharing less and less about his day, and I could see him withdrawing into himself. At the same time, Marcus's criticism of me became more frequent and more pointed. If Tyler came to me upset about something that happened at school, Marcus would say I was coddling him instead of teaching him to handle problems on his own. When Tyler cried during a movie, Marcus would look at me like it was my fault for raising a son who was too emotional. The worst part was how I started doubting myself. I'd lie awake at night wondering if Marcus was right. Was I too soft with Tyler? Was I somehow failing as a mother by nurturing his sensitive nature instead of pushing him to be tougher? I began second-guessing every conversation I had with my children, every hug I gave when they were upset, every time I validated their feelings instead of telling them to suck it up. Jake's increased presence in our lives made everything worse. He'd show up unannounced for dinner and immediately start offering his opinions on how we were raising our kids. "Tyler needs more male influence," he'd tell Marcus right in front of Tyler. "Sarah's turning him into a mama's boy." Then he'd ruffle Emma's hair and say, "At least this one's got some spunk." I watched my son's confidence crumble bit by bit. Tyler stopped talking about his stories at dinner. He quit asking me to read his creative writing assignments. He started spending more time alone in his room, and when I'd check on him, he'd quickly close whatever he was working on and pretend to be doing homework. The breaking point for me came about a month ago when Tyler asked if he could quit Little League to join the school's creative writing club. It was something he'd been thinking about for weeks, and he was so excited when he finally worked up the courage to ask. Marcus's immediate response was, "Absolutely not. You're going to learn to play sports whether you like it or not." When I tried to suggest we talk about it as a family, Marcus turned on me with a fury I'd never seen before. "This is exactly the problem, Sarah. You undermine me every single time I try to teach Tyler how to be a man. You're too sensitive about everything, and you're making him weak." That night, after Tyler had gone to bed, I heard him crying through his bedroom door. When I went in to comfort him, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Mom, am I really too sensitive? Am I doing something wrong?" My heart shattered. Here was my beautiful, empathetic, intelligent son asking me if there was something fundamentally wrong with who he was as a person. I realized that in trying to keep peace in my marriage, I'd allowed my husband and his brother to make my child feel ashamed of his own nature. I was losing my son's trust, my husband's respect, and myself all at the same time. I felt trapped between protecting Tyler and maintaining my marriage, and I was failing at both. Everything came to a head 2 weeks before that life-changing Sunday dinner, and it started with something as innocent as a Harry Potter lunchbox. Tyler had been using the same Hogwarts-themed lunchbox since the beginning of the school year. He absolutely loved it, and honestly, I thought it was adorable how excited he got every morning packing his lunch into it. But apparently, some kids at school had been making fun of him for it, calling it babyish, and saying only girls liked Harry Potter. When Tyler came home that Tuesday afternoon, his eyes were red and puffy from crying. He dropped his backpack by the door and just stood there in our kitchen, looking so small and defeated. I could tell immediately that something had happened, so I sat down with him at our kitchen table and gently asked what was wrong. Through his tears, Tyler told me about how 3 boys in his grade had cornered him at lunch, making fun of his lunchbox and calling him weird for liking fantasy stuff. They'd told him he should be reading books about sports or war instead of fairy tales. The worst part was that when Tyler tried to defend himself by saying that lots of adults read Harry Potter too, they laughed even harder and said his mom probably picked out girly books for him. I felt my heart breaking for my son. Here was this incredibly intelligent, creative kid being bullied for having interests that didn't fit into some ridiculous box of what 12-year-old boys were supposed to like. I pulled him into a hug and told him there was absolutely nothing wrong with loving books, that some of the smartest and most successful people in the world were readers and writers, and that those boys were probably just jealous of his imagination. Marcus walked through the door right at that moment. He took one look at Tyler crying in my arms, and immediately his face hardened. "What's going on here?" he asked, but his tone wasn't concerned or gentle. It was annoyed, like Tyler being upset was somehow an inconvenience. I explained what had happened at school, thinking Marcus would be as outraged as I was that our son was being bullied. Instead, Marcus let out this long, frustrated sigh and said, "For crying out loud, Tyler, you're 12 years old. Stop acting like a baby." I felt like I'd been slapped. Marcus, he's upset because kids were being mean to him. That's completely normal. But Marcus wasn't having it. He looked directly at Tyler and said, "You know what? Maybe those kids have a point. Maybe you should be reading different books. Maybe you should care more about making friends who like normal kid stuff instead of sitting alone reading fairy tales." Tyler's face crumpled and he started crying harder. Marcus completely lost it. "This is exactly the problem, Sarah," he shouted, pointing at me like I was the enemy. "You coddle him every single time something doesn't go his way. You're too sensitive about everything, and now you're making him weak too. Real boys don't cry every time someone says something they don't like." I stood up, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was furious. "He's not weak, Marcus. He's a child who got his feelings hurt by bullies. There's nothing wrong with him having emotions." "There's everything wrong with it," Marcus shot back. "He's never going to survive in the real world if you keep treating him like he's made of glass. You're turning our son into someone who can't handle anything." Tyler ran upstairs to his room, and I could hear his bedroom door slam. I wanted to follow him, but Marcus wasn't done. "I'm serious, Sarah. This has to stop. Tyler needs to toughen up, and you need to stop encouraging this sensitive act. He's going to get eaten alive out there if he doesn't learn to be stronger." That weekend, Marcus invited Jake over for dinner, and I knew I was in for trouble. Jake had been drinking before he even arrived, and within 10 minutes of sitting down at our table, he was offering his unsolicited opinions about our parenting. "You know what your problem is, Marcus," Jake said, pointing his beer bottle at my husband. "You let Sarah run the show. She's got Tyler convinced that crying is acceptable behavior for boys." Marcus nodded along with every word, and I watched my husband agree with his brother's assessment that I was somehow damaging our son by being supportive and understanding. Jake continued, "A real man would put his foot down and fix this situation. She's turning Tyler into a mama's boy, and if you don't stop it now, he's going to be soft for the rest of his life." I sat there listening to them discuss me and my son like we weren't even human beings worthy of basic respect. After that horrible weekend with Jake's comments about me needing to be fixed, I spent 3 sleepless nights lying in bed next to Marcus, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I kept replaying that dinner conversation over and over, hearing Jake's voice saying, "A real man would put his foot down," and seeing Marcus nod in agreement like my feelings and my parenting were problems that needed to be solved. On Wednesday morning, after Marcus left for work and the kids left for school, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and I came to a realization that terrified me. I was disappearing. Not physically, but the person I used to be was slowly being erased by my desperate attempts to keep everyone else comfortable. I'd been shrinking myself, editing my reactions, and second-guessing every maternal instinct I had, all in the hope that if I just became less of who I was, maybe the criticism would stop. But it wasn't stopping. If anything, the more I tried to change, the bolder Marcus and Jake became in their attacks on my character and my parenting. I was losing my son's trust while failing to gain my husband's respect, and I realized I was teaching Tyler that the people who love you most are allowed to make you feel ashamed of who you are. I made a decision that scared me more than anything I'd ever done in my marriage. I was going to stop defending myself, stop making excuses, and stop trying to minimize Marcus's behavior to keep the peace. I was going to let him show exactly who he was becoming, and I was going to trust that the people who truly loved our family would see what I'd been dealing with. I picked up my phone and called Marcus's parents, David and Linda. They lived about an hour away and usually only came for holidays or special occasions, but I'd always had a good relationship with them. Linda answered on the second ring, and when I asked if they'd like to come for dinner on Sunday, she sounded genuinely excited. "We'd love to, Sarah. It's been too long since we've seen the kids." I didn't tell Marcus about the invitation until Friday night. When I mentioned that his parents were coming for Sunday dinner, he seemed pleased but a little surprised. "That's nice, honey. Any particular reason?" I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "I just thought it would be good for them to see how our family dinners go these days." Something in my tone must have registered because Marcus gave me a questioning look, but I didn't elaborate. For the first time in months, I wasn't going to explain myself or try to manage everyone else's reactions. Saturday afternoon, Jake texted Marcus asking if he could stop by Sunday evening. Usually, I would have found some polite way to discourage the visit, especially with Marcus's parents coming. But this time, when Marcus asked if it was okay, I simply said, "Sure, Jake can come." Marcus looked surprised by my easy agreement, but I just smiled and continued preparing for what I knew would be either the beginning of real change in our family or the end of my marriage, as I knew it. That night, I had a conversation with Tyler that I should have had weeks ago. I went into his room where he was reading, and I sat on the edge of his bed. "Tyler, I want you to know something important. There is absolutely nothing wrong with who you are. You're kind, you're intelligent, you're creative, and you care about other people's feelings. Those are not weaknesses. Those are some of the most important qualities a person can have." Tyler looked up from his book with tears in his eyes. "But Dad says I'm too sensitive." "Your father is wrong about that," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Being sensitive means you notice things other people miss. It means you care when someone is hurting. It means you have the courage to feel things deeply in a world that often tells people to shut down their hearts. I took a deep breath before continuing. "Tomorrow at dinner, I want you to be exactly who you are. Talk about your stories, share what you're excited about, and don't hide your interests to make anyone else comfortable. Can you do that for me?" Tyler nodded, and I could see something shifting in his expression. A little spark of the confidence that had been slowly disappearing was starting to flicker back to life. I had no idea that I was setting the stage for my 12-year-old son to deliver the most powerful lesson in courage and integrity that any of us had ever witnessed. Sunday evening arrived faster than I expected, and by 5 o'clock, Marcus's parents were at our front door with genuine smiles and warm hugs for everyone. David had brought Tyler a book about young inventors throughout history, and Linda surprised Emma with a set of watercolor pencils that made her eyes light up like Christmas morning. Watching my children interact with their grandparents reminded me of what unconditional love and acceptance actually looked like in our family. We gathered around our dining room table for Tyler's favorite meal, homemade spaghetti and meatballs with garlic bread. For the first 30 minutes, everything felt exactly like I'd hoped it would. Tyler was animated and confident, telling David and Linda about his short story that had won second place in the school district's creative writing contest. His grandparents were genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions about his characters and plot development, and I could see Tyler's confidence growing with every encouraging comment. David leaned forward with real curiosity. "Tyler, how do you come up with your story ideas? Do they just pop into your head, or do you have a process?" Tyler's face lit up as he launched into an explanation about how he gets inspiration from books he reads and dreams he has. I watched Marcus during this conversation, noticing how his jaw tightened and how he kept checking his phone, clearly uncomfortable with the attention Tyler's writing was receiving. Jake decided to make his entrance without bothering to knock, just walking through our front door like he lived here, bringing with him the unmistakable smell of beer and that particular brand of aggressive confidence that comes from drinking before social events. "Sorry I'm late, family," he announced loudly, pulling out the empty chair next to Marcus without waiting for an invitation. Jake immediately started dominating the conversation with inappropriate jokes and loud opinions about everything from sports to politics. I watched David and Linda exchange uncomfortable glances, clearly trying to figure out who this person was and why he felt entitled to interrupt our family dinner. Tyler, remembering our conversation from the night before about being authentically himself, continued sharing details about his writing with his grandparents. He was explaining the fantasy world he'd created for his contest-winning story when Jake cut him off mid-sentence. "Seriously, Tyler, you need to find some real hobbies," Jake said, waving his beer bottle dismissively. "Writing fairy tales isn't going to pay your bills when you're an adult. You should be learning practical skills, maybe getting into sports or something useful." Linda looked genuinely offended. "Actually, Tyler, writing is an incredibly valuable skill. Some of the most successful people in the world are storytellers and communicators." Jake laughed in a way that made my skin crawl. With all due respect, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's making kids soft these days. Tyler needs to focus on becoming a man instead of living in make-believe worlds. I felt my heart start racing because I knew Marcus was about to choose a side, and I was terrified it wouldn't be Tyler's side. Marcus looked directly at our son and said, "Jake's got a point, Tyler. And you do spend an awful lot of time on this writing stuff. Maybe it's time to focus on more practical things." Tyler's face fell, but he tried one more time to stand up for himself. "But Dad, Mrs. Peterson says I have real talent. She thinks I might be able to get scholarships for creative writing if I keep working at it." What Marcus said next will be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. "Tyler, stop being so dramatic about everything. You're too sensitive about this writing thing, just like your mother is too sensitive about everything else. Even our kid needs to toughen up because this whole family has gotten way too emotional." The entire room went silent. David and Linda were staring at their son like they'd never seen him before. Emma stopped eating and looked back and forth between her father and brother with wide, confused eyes. Jake, feeling emboldened by Marcus's support and his own liquid courage, decided to deliver the most disgusting comment I've ever heard spoken in my own home. "Exactly right," Jake said, pointing his fork at me like I was the problem. "A real man would fix her attitude real quick, and then the kid wouldn't have these sensitivity problems." What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my son's courage and my husband's character. Tyler stood up slowly, his hands shaking but his voice perfectly steady, and looked his father straight in the eyes. "A real man protects his mom and doesn't blame her for caring about people's feelings. You're wrong, Dad. And Uncle Jake, you're wrong too." Tyler continued with a strength that amazed me. "Mom isn't too sensitive. She's the only one who listens when I'm scared or excited or sad. She's the only one who makes me feel like it's okay to be myself. Real men don't make their families feel bad for having emotions. They protect the people they love." Marcus's mouth opened and closed, like he was trying to speak, but no words came out. His face went through shock, anger, and something that looked like pure shame. He couldn't look at Tyler, couldn't look at me, couldn't even look at his own parents. David broke the silence with quiet firmness. "Tyler's absolutely right, Marcus. I never spoke to your mother the way you just spoke to Sarah." Linda's voice was steady but disappointed. "Son, we didn't raise you to be the kind of man who tears down his family." The silence that followed Tyler's words felt like it stretched on forever. Jake was the first to move, pushing his chair back from the table with a scraping sound that made everyone flinch. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, grabbing his beer and heading toward the door. "Everyone in this house has lost their minds. You're all too damn sensitive." He slammed our front door so hard that the picture frames on the wall rattled. David and Linda immediately stood up and started clearing dishes, moving around our kitchen like they belonged there, giving all of us space to process what had just happened. Linda caught my eye and mouthed, "We'll talk later," with a look that told me she was both proud and heartbroken by what she'd witnessed. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, staring down at his plate like it might contain answers to questions he didn't even know how to ask. Emma had tears in her eyes, not really understanding what had happened, but sensing that something important and scary had just occurred. Tyler was still standing, his hands no longer shaking, looking at his father with a mixture of sadness and determination. I finally found my voice. "Tyler, honey, why don't you take Emma upstairs and help her get ready for her bath?" Tyler nodded and gently took his sister's hand. As they walked past Marcus, Tyler paused for just a moment, like he was hoping his dad might say something, might acknowledge what had just happened. But Marcus still couldn't look up from his plate. After the kids went upstairs, David sat back down at the table across from his son. "Marcus, we need to talk." What followed was the most honest conversation I'd heard in our house in months. David told Marcus that he was disappointed in the man his son had become, that the way Marcus had spoken to me and Tyler was unacceptable, and that Jake's influence on our family had been toxic and destructive. Linda took me aside in the kitchen while the men talked. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I had no idea things had gotten this bad. You've been dealing with this alone, and that's not right." She hugged me, and for the first time in months, I felt like someone truly understood what I'd been going through. "That little boy of yours," Linda continued, "he's got more courage and integrity than most adults I know. You should be incredibly proud of how you've raised him." Marcus's parents left around 9 o'clock, but not before David pulled Marcus into a long hug and told him, "Son, you can choose to be better than this. Your family needs you to be better than this." After they left, Marcus disappeared into the garage for almost 2 hours. I could hear him out there, moving things around, probably trying to process everything that had happened. When he finally came back inside, his eyes were red and his voice was hoarse. "Sarah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything." We sat on our couch, farther apart than we'd sat in years, and Marcus told me things I'd never heard before. He talked about feeling like a failure at work, about his crew not respecting him the way they used to, about watching younger guys get promoted over him. He admitted that Jake's constant presence in our lives had made him feel like he needed to prove his masculinity by being tougher, more controlling, more critical. "I've been taking my insecurities out on you and Tyler," he said, and his voice cracked. "I convinced myself that you were making Tyler weak, but the truth is, I was jealous of how close you two are. I was jealous that he trusts you with his feelings and he doesn't trust me." Marcus looked at me with tears in his eyes. Our 12-year-old son just showed me what a real man looks like, and I'm ashamed that it took him standing up to me for me to realize what I've become. The next morning, I found Tyler in his room writing in a notebook. When I asked what he was working on, he looked up with a small smile. "I'm writing a story about a boy who teaches his dad how to be brave." "Tyler," I said, sitting on his bed, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. What you did last night took incredible courage." He put down his pencil and looked at me seriously. "Mom, I was scared to say anything for so long, but I couldn't let them keep being mean to you. You always protect Emma and me, so I wanted to protect you too." That conversation broke my heart and filled it at the same time. My son had found his voice by defending mine. Over the next few weeks, Marcus made real changes. He called a family therapist and scheduled sessions for all of us. He cut off contact with Jake entirely, telling him that he wouldn't tolerate anyone disrespecting his family. Most importantly, he started really listening to Tyler, asking genuine questions about his writing and showing interest in the things that mattered to our son. It wasn't perfect overnight. We had difficult conversations, moments of backsliding, and plenty of tears. But Tyler's courage that night had cracked something open in our family. And for the first time in months, we were dealing with truth instead of trying to manage everyone's comfort. I learned that teaching my children to be emotionally intelligent and sensitive wasn't making them weak. It was giving them the strength to stand up for what's right, even when it's terrifying. Tyler showed all of us that real strength isn't about dominating others or suppressing feelings. It's about having the courage to protect the people you love, even when that means standing up to the people you love when they're wrong. My son didn't just defend me that night. He showed my husband the man he could choose to become. and he reminded me of the mother I never wanted to stop being. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, but I wanted to share it because I think there are other families out there dealing with similar struggles. If you're a parent questioning whether you're being too sensitive with your children, or if you're in a relationship where your emotions are being dismissed, please know that your feelings matter and your voice deserves to be heard. Tyler taught me that sometimes the people we love most need us to be brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when it's scary. And sometimes our children can teach us lessons about courage that we never saw coming. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Have you ever had a moment when someone unexpected stood up for you? Or maybe you've been the one who found the courage to speak up when it mattered most. Your stories and experiences help all of us feel less alone. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more real stories about family, relationships, and finding your voice, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Sharing this video would mean the world to me because it helps these stories reach other people who might need to hear them. And remember, being sensitive isn't a weakness. Caring deeply about the people you love isn't something to apologize for. And teaching our children to have emotional courage might just be the most important gift we can give them. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.